And thank you everybody for being here. It's nice to see everybody. I'm just going to minimize myself so I don't have to watch myself speak. So I'm going to give you a little roadmap of our next 8 minutes together. I'm going to provide some context for the work we do, share a client story, show a little gratitude, and then describe some serious work that the Immigration Law Unit is currently facing. Each of us has a story, and it's partly based on choices we make, but it's mostly based on things that are completely out of our control. And each of our stories makes up the essence of who we are and how we move through this world. And our story begins the day we're born. The Rogue Valley includes your story, it includes mine, the story of your relatives, your children, your colleagues, your friends, everyone around you. Whether we know each other or not, we're all small parts of this big collective story that makes up the fabric of our community. And legal services are obviously critical to strengthening the fabric of our community. The Center for Nonprofit Legal Services has a mission, and that's to provide equal access to justice for qualifying residents of the Rogue Valley. Folks who are low income, elderly, unhoused, or otherwise experiencing a barrier to accessing a quality lawyer. Then we take their story and we fight for them. I'd like to offer you Sam's story. Sam was born in Saudi Arabia, but because of time spent in Lebanon and Syria, he had moderate to extreme PTSD. He arrived in the United States in 2015 with a little bit of a savings and a passion for fixing motorcycles. But unfortunately, right when he arrived here, his savings was taken from him by somebody he trusted, and he was forced into a labor trafficking situation that involved guns being held at his head and other threats of physical violence. He was able to escape that situation. He moved to New Mexico, found work in a restaurant, and after a little while met a woman and they fell in love. They had a shared dream of owning a little piece of land, raising goats, living off grid, and everything felt really wonderful for Sam. But unfortunately, soon after he got married to this woman, he began to experience domestic violence and abuse. She would belittle him, demean him, call him stupid, worthless. She hid his identity documents from him. She would leave him in the desert without food, water, or gas for the RV for days. She demanded sex from him and threatened him with deportation if he didn't acquiesce to her demands. And you might see Sam and not believe me, that he was made to feel small and little and worthless because he's this big bear of a dude. But remember that domestic violence isn't really about physical power. It's about control and manipulation through belittling. It's about the slow and methodical daily degradation until a person actually believes that they're worthless and powerless. So Sam finally left the situation without his identity documents, without any clothes but what he had on, and he didn't even have shoes. He just had his motorcycle. He made it to California and had a consultation with an immigration attorney there. But unfortunately, the immigration attorney didn't really believe him that he had experienced domestic violence, and Sam became emotional in the telling of his story. The immigration attorney started to feel threatened and had a security escort Sam out of the building. Well, at that point, he didn't feel like he could trust anybody with his story ever again. He eventually made it to Oregon and applied for our services. It took my colleague Nadia and I a long time of email exchanges, phone exchanges, just to get him to come into the office because he was in so much fear that his story wouldn't be trusted. He was in so much fear of sharing his story with others that he didn't even really want to come in for a consultation. And at this time, he was also totally unhoused, jobless, no money. He finally came into the office and Nadia and I spent hours with him, and he broke down and told us his story. And even during the telling of his story, you could feel, and he described the sense of shame, just that we would believe him, but also that he had experienced trafficking, labor trafficking, and domestic violence. And it took many months of excellent lawyering on Nadia's part and support of the Center for Nonprofit Legal Services to gather his whole story and to package his story and apply for the immigration petition that he qualified for. And the reason why we had to do so much work just to gain his trust, because he had been lied to so many times by people he trusted. He'd been taken advantage of. He had been exploited so often. It took a long time for him to realize that we really did have his best interests in mind. And during all of this, and until very recently, he was still unhoused, sleeping in pear orchards or along Bear Creek. He would go to food pantries sometimes to ask for food, but he had a lot of guilt and shame in asking for help. He felt really judged. He felt that people looked at him and thought, look at this big, strong, capable guy. Why should he be getting handouts? Is what he imagined. And so he got most of his food from the trash. But finally, his immigration petition was approved. His work permit arrived. Our office nominated him for the Mail Tribune Light One Candle series, and a reader donated him a really nice truck. And that's when the domino effect kicked in, because he got his driver's license, he got work with his work permit, and he gained confidence in himself. He was recently offered a job fixing motorcycles, his dream, and he's preparing with Nadia for his residency interview. And we have so many success stories like this at the Center for Nonprofit Legal Services. I like to call the law I do happy law. And I'd like to just acknowledge some of the people that I practice happy law with. Nadezhda Nadia Andreeva, she put all of the heavy lifting into Sam's case, and she really gifts the center with her compassionate heart and her excellent lawyering. Sean Van Alsdal, he is the backbone of the Immigration Law Project. It's because of him that we are able to serve so many people. Vanessa Vega, Yvette Hernandez, Ashley Alvarez Lopez, they're three advocates who have exquisite client interaction, and they make our community stronger every day. Deborah Lee, of course, she is so dedicated to our community. And every time I come to her and I say, Deborah, there's this need we're seeing, a new need, she says, let's find a way to help. I always know that I can count on her. Of course, there are some private attorneys who support our work here, and I really wouldn't be able to do it without them. None of us would. Kevin Stout, Susan Krant, Mark Twy, John Almaguer, thank you for everything you do. But I didn't really want to spend all my time on the story of Sam and gratitude for others. His story does illustrate the imperative work we do on a regular basis here at the Center for Nonprofit Legal Services. He literally had nobody else to go to. What I wanted to talk to you about mostly was the influx of children and youth from the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. In 2010, there was about 8,000 a year unaccompanied minors being apprehended at the US border. In 2011, the number jumped to 16,000. In 2018, the number was 76,000 children and youth coming into the country as unaccompanied minors. And in the first 10 months of 2021, 112,000 children and youth. These kiddos are especially vulnerable because they mostly all experienced abuse, abandonment, neglect, and trauma, and they are especially vulnerable to trafficking here in the United States. And some of these examples are the 7 and 8-year-old siblings from El Salvador. They've got intentional burn marks all over their hands. I don't even know how they arrived at the US border because that part of their story is still so buried in trauma. But what I do know is they crossed the Rio Grande by themselves. They walked up to a border patrol agent, fished a little piece of paper out of their pocket with the phone number for the paternal grandfather that they'd never met, and said one word in English: help. 14-year-old Elia, she's from Honduras. She lived with her great grandmother there. Her great grandmother, who was so incapacitated, Elia, on top of her school, did everything to care for herself and her great grandmother. Her father had been murdered by gang members. Her mother fled to Spain in order to work to send money back. And when she was 13 on her way to the market, she was raped by a gang member. And the gang member then said to her, "You will be my drug mule or I will kill you." And we're thankful that now she's living in Ashland with her grandmother and she's safe here in our community. We've got a client named Jay. She's from Guatemala. She's 16. Her mother died of cancer. She was thrown out of the house by her stepmother, but she's now a high school senior here at South. And finally, 17-year-old M from El Salvador. He lives with his aunt and uncle in a trailer in Phoenix. He told me his story, looking down at the table the whole time, his voice so quiet, about how he was accosted every day on his way to school by local gang members. And the last interaction he had with them, they said to him, "You are going to rob taxi drivers for us. You're going to hold a knife to their neck and you're going to give us the money that you earn." And he finally looked up at me and he said, "My mom didn't raise me to be like that. I could never do that to someone." So instead of hurting others or being killed himself for refusing, he came to the United States and he's safe here now. And these kids and young people, they're a part of our community now. They're a part of my story. And I'm offering you their story and my story today because we do all make up the threads of this fabric. We all make up the story of the Rogue Valley together. And you are all here because a part of your story is that you feel a connection with people who are struggling. Part of your story is that you want to support the empowerment of others and support equal access to justice. And so your donations today really do this. Your donation becomes a part of someone else's story that connects you to them forever. Your donations last year gave Sam a chance to get back on his feet and step into his best life. And now you're giving these battered and traumatized children and youth the opportunity to access safety and support and services. And so everything you do today will strengthen and support the fabric of our community by uplifting their stories. And it also shows that you care about everyone in our community. And it shows our clients that you want to hear their success story at next year's luncheon. Thank you.